Crypto is a word prefix meaning hidden or secret, and it finds uses in places from the clandestine worlds of cryptanalysis and cryptography to the brain rotting like cryptocurrency. And today we're going to be writing a fine line in between amazing and absurd in the intriguing world of cryptozoology, which some of you may find odd because that's a term that's often met with a massive amount of grief amongst scientists. And there's good reason for it. But in order for us to understand why that is, we're going to have to dive into the topic and peel back all its layers until we finally reveal the secrets of cryptozoology. First and foremost, zoology is the research and study of the behavior, structure, physiology, classification, and distribution of animals. So when we add the word crypto in front of that, what do we have? A bunch of animals that take financial advice from Logan Paul? Well, that's definitely not it. What about zoology for animals that are hidden or secret? Not exactly. In order for you to actually study an animal, it has to be, well, not hidden or found, in other words. And we do find brand new species of animals all the time. If you've ever watched the very famous YouTuber AntsCanada, he actually did that and found a species of ant that was known to science but not necessarily known to exist in his country. He also documented that entire journey, the links for which will be in the description, as will the links for just about anything else that I use in this, because I don't want to be the target of H Bomber Guy's next video. This is what some people claim to be the essence of cryptozoology, finding species that we didn't know existed or exist in a place that they shouldn't exist. And then it's just working backwards to figure out why they are there or why we didn't find them sooner. Some guy finds a Burmese python in the Florida Everglades, and we find out that they got released there from zoos destroyed in a hurricane and irresponsible pet owners who didn't want to keep a 20-foot long snake. After that, they're just an invasive species. But there's also migration and population relocations that occur naturally. As a hypothetical, you could have a species of frog that is only found on one specific mountaintop disappear completely from there, only to be found 10 years later, thriving on another mountaintop 20 miles away. I'm leaving this purely as a hypothetical for now because I couldn't find the source, but I think this happened in the Andes mountain range. So if you can find it, please let me know and I'll put it in the description. But accidental introductions and species migrations are pretty simple things that most of us should understand and don't really belong in the realm of cryptozoology. But there are things that do, and some of it stems from a term that you may or may not have heard of: Lazarus taxons. As the name suggests, these are species or entire lineages of animals that have come back from the dead. Okay, not really. It's not like there's a whole list of zombie plants and animals running, jumping, swimming, photosynthesizing, and flying around the planet. These are species that we thought were extinct that resurfaced years, decades, or in the case of the coelacanth, 66 million years after they were thought to have gone extinct. There's also discovering new species that were completely unknown to science, but we'll crack into that tough nut in just a little bit. And as you can imagine, these are all things that are incredibly important, not just to science, but also to conservation efforts. Having verifiable proof and scientific data showing that these populations exist is required to get the ball moving on funding and legislation for protection of wildlife. Truth be told, what we've talked about so far isn't actually part of cryptozoology. Well, it kind of is, but it also really isn't. It's more focused on people taking on the asinine task of looking for living dinosaurs that aren't birds, or more prevalently, people looking for Bigfoot. And that's the problem with cryptozoology. There's a massive demarcation line between what is a legitimate search for extinct species or previously unknown species and the completely asinine world of cryptids. It's Like saying that ghost hunting is anthropology, or using the lore from the Fate franchise as a history lesson. If you don't get that joke, watch some anime. It's not just cartoons from Japan for kids, okay? For the uninitiated, a cryptid is an animal that doesn't exist. Okay, I shouldn't be dismissive with my definitions. Their existence is disputed or unsubstantiated at best, and fantasy at the worst. Things like Bigfoot, Mothman, El Chupacabra, or the Loch Ness Monster. You should be able to see why this gets a lot of grief from the world of science. The people who do all that legitimate science that I talked about earlier in this video do not call themselves, will not call themselves, and absolutely refuse to be equated to cryptozoologists. Why? Because they're doing real science in the fields of zoology, biology, and anthropology, while cryptozoologists are attempting to imitate the methodologies and processes that go on in the world of science. The key words are attempt and imitate. As a term, cryptozoology can date back as early as the 1930s, but it's cemented somewhere between the late 80s and mid 90s. At least that's when it seems to have gotten into popular use. I'll save you the boring history lesson on how it came about and the historical figures that are said to have inspired it, mostly because it's unimportant to the topic at hand. It's not uncommon for new fields of science to pop up, but they usually have a reason to exist. High energy physics doesn't exist without lasers and nuclear bombs, and paleobotany doesn't exist without fossilized plants. So, if cryptozoology was a legitimate field of science, it would be a subsection of zoology focused purely on the discovery of new or out-of-place species. But the majority of people who are involved with cryptozoology are only pretending to do science, and I'm not saying that lightly. See, the scientific process is pretty simple and straightforward to do. You make your hypothesis, do examples, collect data, evaluate the data, then revise the hypothesis and repeat the process until you have a hypothesis that matches with multiple sets of data. You don't start drawing conclusions until after you've gone through this process multiple times. In cryptozoology, they're working backwards from a conclusion and trying to find data that supports the conclusion, even if they have to fake it. To be fair, it's most likely only a small percentage of cryptozoologists that actually fake the proof or evidence that they find. The majority of TV shows and mockumentaries almost certainly do, but they're expected to have some kind of drama associated with them in order to keep the audience captivated. But if you peel back the drama elements of them, you'd see the real techniques and methodologies that scientists use when finding any species in the wild. Trail cameras, pheromone traps, DNA sample traps, etc., etc. These work to get a general idea of the number of species that exist in an area. But if you're looking for a specific species, well, then these methods actually only serve to be more like finding a needle in a haystack. And if the particular species that you're looking for almost certainly doesn't exist, so because they're working backwards from a conclusion, and because the data that they receive turns out to be inconclusive or non-evidence of the particular monster they're tracking down, there's a very particular phrase that comes to mind here. If all you have is a hammer, then everything starts to look like a nail. Random tufts of animal fur, triggered traps with the bait gone, blurry images on trail cams, all of these things look to them as real evidence when in reality they aren't. And when they send in these pieces of evidence to get tested, they either come back with results that are for the local fauna or inconclusive due to the small sample size or degradation of the sample. And it's those inconclusive results that drive them forward, because inconclusive to them means that they're on the right track. Now, we shouldn't completely dismiss what happens in cryptozoology just because it's dominated by fake science, frauds, and a lot of narcissistic people. If we dismissed everything that happened in the world of AI, electric vehicles, and space exploration because of Elon Musk, we'd be doing a disservice. There's a lot of cryptozoologists who are actual scientists doing actual science. And there are a lot of biologists and zoologists who are doing research that is adjacent to what would be seen in cryptozoology. Let's take the search for the thylacine, for example. There's been a number of searches for it over the past 100 years that were and are still sponsored by the Australian government, universities, and private interest groups that employ real scientists and do real science. None of these have turned a positive result, but that doesn't discredit the work done. This is one of the few areas where cryptozoology actually flows over into mainstream science. Most scientists will tell you it's unlikely that there are populations of the thylacine in the wild, but there is always a small chance for it. They'll tell you the same thing about Bigfoot, but I'd put my money on us finding a thylacine over Bigfoot. You'll have noticed throughout this video about cryptozoology that I failed to talk about the actual cryptids that most people associate with it. That's not a mistake. While I do find the history of these monstrous creatures quite entertaining, I also think it grinds against the core of what this video is about. If that's something that you'd like to see in the future, though, let me know by subscribing to the channel. I wouldn't mind doing something like that, but do be aware that it would be more akin to a history lesson than it would be to a scientific breakdown of what these monsters are. Having an interest in this topic is not a bad thing. Heck, even having a hobby revolving around it is not something to be ashamed of. But be careful of how much of the Kool-Aid you drink. There's a giant difference between doing scientific research and jumping off the deep end. Anyways, I'll see you next time.